The bell above the door chimed as Anna stepped into the diner, pushing against the faint resistance of the old glass door. A faint scent of bacon grease and coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the sweeter smell of fresh pie cooling on the counter. It was late afternoon, a kind of time when regulars gathered for conversation. Teenagers slouched in booths, and retirees lingered over refills. Anna's entrance did not seem remarkable at first. She was neither flashy nor loud, dressed in simple jeans and a plain t-shirt, her dark hair tied loosely at the back. She chose a booth in the corner, a spot with a view of the window and the street outside. Sunlight poured through, painting the cracked linoleum floor in long streaks of gold. She liked corners. They gave her an anchor, a place where no one could sit behind her. Years of instinct guided her choices, though no one in the diner would have noticed. She slid into the seat with quiet efficiency, back pressed lightly against the wall, hands folded on the table. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, came over with a notepad. "Coffee?" she asked. Anna nodded. She didn't have the energy to request anything else. Coffee was safe, neutral, enough to give her hands something to hold. When the mug arrived, Anna wrapped her fingers around it, letting the heat soak into her skin. For a moment, it grounded her. She glanced around the diner, observing without appearing to. It was habit now, automatic, the way her eyes catalogued exits, measured distances, read body language. Most of the customers weren't paying attention to her. An older couple by the counter argued softly over pie flavors. Two truckers sat hunched at a table near the door, laughing about something only they understood. But then the laughter shifted. It started quietly, a stifled chuckle from the booth across the aisle. Anna felt the prickle before she saw it, that sharp awareness of being watched. She turned slightly, pretending to reach for sugar, and caught the glance. A woman in her 30s leaned toward her companion, whispering something. Both looked at Anna's arms, and their mouths curled. Anna's sleeves had slipped up. The scars were visible, faint under the light but unmistakable. They traced her skin in pale, raised lines, some short, others long, one cutting diagonally across her forearm like a jagged river. She didn't bother pulling her sleeves down. She had tried once. The fabric always rode back up eventually, and besides, hiding them never stopped the questions or the assumptions. Another laugh, this time from behind her. Anna straightened, her jaw tightening. She didn't need to hear the words. She knew them already. Addict, crazy, failure. She had heard them whispered in grocery aisles, muttered at gas stations, implied in strangers' eyes. No one ever thought to ask. She lifted the mug, sipped her coffee, and kept her face blank. Inside, though, she felt the old ache stir. It wasn't just humiliation, it was weariness, the endless weight of being misunderstood. Each scar carried history, years of nights spent awake, of battles no one had seen, of survival wrestled from chaos. But to them, she was nothing more than damaged goods. The laughter grew louder when the door jingled again. A group of teenagers entered, all energy and noise, their sneakers squeaking against the floor. They moved toward a booth near hers, tossing jokes back and forth. She tensed. Teenagers were the worst, bold, unfiltered, cruel without even realizing it. She lowered her gaze, hoping they would ignore her. It didn't work. One of the boys noticed first. He nudged his friend, pointed toward her arms, and smirked. The others leaned in, grinning. "Hey," one said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Did you try to fight a lawnmower, or what?" The booth erupted in laughter. Another added, "Nah, looks like she lost." Anna froze, her face heating though she kept her posture still. The waitress, busy at the counter, glanced their way and frowned, but didn't intervene. Anna stirred her coffee slowly, focusing on the tiny whirlpool of liquid, pretending not to hear, pretending it'd become a kind of armor. But armor didn't stop the sting. The memories came unbidden, triggered by the laughter, the sharp crack of gunfire, the smell of burning sand, the sound of her own ragged breathing as she pressed her arm against the torn fabric of her sleeve, trying to stop the bleeding. The medic's voice shouting over the chaos. She had survived that day, survived others, but each scar remained, etched reminders of battles that civilians could never imagine. And yet, here she was, reduced to a punchline in a small-town diner. She thought about leaving. The thought rose quickly, almost comforting. She could walk out, let the door slam behind her, drive away, and never return. It would be easier. She hated confrontation, hated the way her voice faltered when she was angry. Easier to vanish. But part of her resisted. Why should she have to leave? Why should she always be the one shrinking into shadows? The laughter continued, filling the diner like static. Some customers pretended not to notice. Others watched quietly, complicit in their silence. Anna's chest tightened. She stared at her reflection in the dark surface of her coffee. The woman looking back seemed tired, worn, older than her 34 years. She thought about the years since she had come home, about the nights spent awake, replaying the desert, about the people she had lost, names she carried like ghosts, about how, in the silence of her apartment, she sometimes pressed her fingers against the scars, reminding herself they were real, reminding herself she had survived. Survival, she knew, came with a price. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the mug down. She clenched her fist under the table, nails digging into her palm. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them what those scars really meant, to spit the truth into their laughter. But the words stuck. The stories were too heavy, too sacred to throw into a room of strangers who wouldn't understand. So she sat, silent, alone in her corner. The bell above the door jingled again. Anna didn't look up at first. She expected another group of noisy teenagers, another burst of laughter. But the air shifted. Conversations faltered. Even the teenagers fell momentarily quiet. Something about the presence that had just entered disrupted the rhythm of the room. When she finally glanced toward the door, she saw him. An older man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood in the entrance. His posture was unmistakably military straight, disciplined, though softened by age. A faded cap rested on his head, the letters embroidered across it frayed but legible, the name of a combat unit. His eyes scanned the diner quickly, a sweep of assessment that seemed instinctive. Then they settled on her. Anna felt the weight of his gaze. It wasn't curiosity, not the usual judgment. It was something sharper, deeper, something that froze her in place. His eyes had locked onto her wrist, just below the scars, where the ink of an old tattoo curved against her skin. Her breath caught. His expression changed instantly, from neutral to stunned recognition. And in that moment, before he even took a step toward her, Anna knew. This day, this diner, this humiliation, was about to shift into something she had never expected. The teenager's laughter rang through the diner like a careless bell, bouncing off the walls, sharp enough to cut through Anna's defenses. She kept her eyes on her coffee, shoulders taut, willing herself to be invisible. The waitress lingered at the counter, lips pressed tight, clearly uncomfortable, yet unwilling to provoke the group. A few other diners shot uneasy glances in Anna's direction, but no one spoke. Then the bell above the door jingled again. At first, Anna didn't look up. She expected another wave of rowdy energy, maybe more kids or a group of locals stopping in after work. But the energy in the room shifted almost instantly. The chatter at the counter slowed. The teenagers' voices faltered, their mockery hanging unfinished in the air. It was subtle, but Anna felt it like the sudden hush before a storm. She raised her eyes. An older man had entered, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying himself with a posture that spoke of discipline and habit. He wasn't young, perhaps in his late 60s, but his presence filled the doorway. His jaw was firm, his gaze sharp, scanning the diner with the same instinctive precision Anna knew from another life. He wore a faded cap, its stitching frayed, but still legible. The emblem was military, unmistakable to anyone who had served. To others, it was just a hat. To Anna, it was a relic of survival, a mark of belonging she hadn't seen in years. The man's eyes swept across the room in a quick assessment, taking in tables, exits, faces, before stopping suddenly. His gaze locked on her. Anna stiffened. Her instinct screamed to look away, to retreat into invisibility. But she couldn't. His stare wasn't casual curiosity. It was sharp, searching, as though he had just spotted something he hadn't expected to find. Her pulse quickened. The stranger stepped inside fully, letting the door close behind him. He walked with steady strides, not rushed but purposeful. Conversations in the diner grew quieter, like the room itself was holding its breath. Even the teenagers, bold just moments before, sat back, their laughter cut short. They didn't understand why, but they felt it too, the weight of the man's presence. Anna shifted in her seat, uncomfortable under his focus. She glanced down at her coffee, pretending to sip, but her hand trembled slightly. She didn't want anyone's attention, least of all his. But then she realized he wasn't staring at her scars. Not exactly. His gaze was fixed lower at her wrist, where the edge of an old tattoo peeked out from beneath the pale lines of scar tissue. The ink had faded with time, but the symbol was still recognizable. A unit insignia. Her throat tightened. The man's expression changed, the faint lines of age deepening as shock crossed his features. Recognition. It was unmistakable. He froze mid-step, staring as though he had just seen a ghost. Anna's chest constricted. She wanted to pull her sleeve down, to hide the tattoo, but her arms refused to move. Shame, fear, and something unnameable surged within her. She hadn't expected anyone to ever notice again, not here in this small-town diner, not after so many years of silence. The man adjusted his cap, his hand shaking slightly. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved toward her booth. His boots struck the linoleum with measured force, each step echoing louder in Anna's ears than it should have. The room seemed to shrink around them. The teenagers, suddenly subdued, exchanged nervous glances. They sensed something had shifted, though they didn't yet understand what. The waitress paused mid-step, holding a coffee pot, her eyes flicking from the veteran to Anna. Anna's breath quickened. She gripped her mug tighter, grounding herself. What did he see? Why did he look at her like that? The man stopped at her table. For a moment, he just stood there, staring down at her. His eyes weren't mocking. They weren't judgmental. They were heavy with something far deeper: recognition, disbelief, and a shadow of pain. Mind if I sit? He asked finally, his voice gravelly yet steady. Anna blinked. She hadn't expected him to speak, much less ask politely. She glanced around the diner. Every set of eyes was on them now, waiting. The teenagers were silent, their bravado evaporated. Anna's instinct told her to say no, to avoid this sudden storm, but something else rooted her in place. Curiosity, fear, a strange, reluctant hope. She nodded faintly. The man slid into the booth across from her, moving with the careful precision of someone who had lived in his body long enough to know its limits. He set his cap on the table, his hands rough and scarred. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at her wrist. Anna shifted uncomfortably, pulling her arm closer, but it was too late. The tattoo was visible, plain as day. He reached for his sleeve, rolled it back slowly, and extended his arm across the table. Anna's eyes widened. There, on his forearm, was the same insignia. Bold, aged by time, but unmistakably identical to hers. The room went completely silent. The clatter of silverware stopped. Even the hum of conversation at the counter died. It was as though the entire diner had become an audience to a private revelation. The teenagers stared, their mouths half open. The waitress held her coffee pot mid-air, tears brimming in her eyes. Anna's chest tightened. Her coffee mug rattled against the table as her hands trembled. She couldn't breathe. The man's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "You served," he said softly. Not a question, a truth. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She swallowed hard, forcing sound from her throat. "Afghanistan," she whispered. 12 years ago." The man's jaw clenched. His gaze flickered, and for a second, she saw it the weight of memory, the ghosts he carried. "So did I," he said, voice heavy. Same deployment. Same company. The air around them crackled with unspoken understanding. For Anna, the world blurred. She had carried her story alone for so long, buried beneath judgment, ridicule, and silence. To find someone here, in this diner of all places, someone who bore the same mark, someone who knew her chest, ached with relief and fear all at once. The teenagers shrank back into their booth, their smirks gone. The crowd, once entertained by her humiliation, now sat in hushed awe. Anna gripped her mug tighter, holding on to something real as the weight of recognition settled between them. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, she wasn't alone. The silence in the diner thickened, pressing in on Anna from every direction. She felt the weight of 100 unspoken questions hanging in the air. Conversations had stopped, forks hovered mid-air, and the laughter that had once targeted her had evaporated into a stunned hush. The man's arm rested on the table between them, sleeve rolled back, tattoo visible. Time and age had faded the ink, but the insignia was unmistakable. It mirrored the mark on her wrist almost perfectly. Anna stared at it, her stomach tightening, her throat dry. She had traced her own tattoo countless times in solitude, fingers brushing over the ink, as if to remind herself she was real, that it had happened, that her service was not a dream she had imagined in the fog of sleepless nights. But she had never expected to see its twin here. Her lips parted, but no words came. The only sound she could hear was her own pulse hammering in her ears. The man's eyes didn't waver. They were steady, sharp, the kind of gaze that came from years of measuring threats and allies alike. Yet there was no threat in them, now only recognition. Recognition so deep it unsettled her. "You were there," he said quietly, his voice low, almost reverent. Anna's heart skipped. The words were not a question. They were a certainty. A statement born from the kind of truth that could not be faked. She forced herself to swallow, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Yes, Kandahar, 2011. The man inhaled slowly, his chest rising as if the memory itself carried weight. "Bravo Company," he added. Her eyes flickered up, meeting his fully for the first time. "Yes," she said again, louder this time, though her voice trembled. Something inside her cracked open, something she had sealed tightly for more than a decade. The recognition in his voice was like a key turning inside a lock she had long since abandoned. The man's name was still a mystery, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They were bound by something stronger than names, stronger than the years that had passed. He leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving hers. "It's been a long time," he murmured. Anna almost laughed, though the sound caught in her throat. "Feels like a lifetime," she said softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, though. It was heavy with shared ghosts, with deserts and dust, with nights lit by tracer fire and the screams of comrades lost. Around them, the diner had transformed. The teenagers who had mocked her just moments before now sat frozen in their booth, their eyes wide, shame painted across their faces. One of them shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak. The older couple by the counter had turned their chairs slightly, openly watching now. The waitress lingered a few feet away, her coffee pot forgotten, tears glistening in her eyes. Anna felt all of it, the weight of so many eyes. But for once, it didn't suffocate her. Because in front of her, across the booth, sat someone who understood. Someone who didn't need her to explain every scar, every night of terror, every loss that still clawed at her chest. She breathed, shaky but real. I thought I was the only one left. The man's jaw tightened, his gaze darkening. Not the only one, he said firmly. Just scattered. The word echoed inside her. She thought of the faces she had carried with her for years, faces she hadn't seen since the day they parted, some forever frozen in memory. She thought of the funerals, the folded flags, the long silence that followed when everyone else moved on. But she couldn't. Her hand drifted unconsciously toward her scars, fingers brushing lightly across the raised lines. The man's eyes followed the movement, but didn't flinch. He didn't look away in disgust or pity like so many others had. His eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. You made it home, he said. That counts for something. The words struck her like a blow. How many times had she questioned that exact thing, whether surviving counted, whether she deserved it when others hadn't? She had whispered it into the dark, screamed it in her dreams, but never once heard it spoken by someone who could truly understand. Her chest tightened. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. You don't know what I've carried, she whispered, almost as if confessing. His gaze didn't waver. I can guess, he said, because I've carried it too. The words dropped into her like stones into water, rippling outward. For so long, she had believed her burden was singular, unique in its crushing weight. But here sat a man who spoke as if he recognized every jagged edge of it. The waitress stepped forward hesitantly, refilling their mugs without asking. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured, but her voice was steady. On the house, she said softly, before retreating again. The man lifted his mug, nodding in thanks, but his eyes remained on Anna. She finally found her voice again, though it cracked. What's your name? Tom, he said simply. She nodded, tasting the name, anchoring it. Anna. Tom's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Anna, he repeated, as though committing it to memory. The air in the diner shifted again, softer now, reverent. For the spectators, this was a scene unfolding before their eyes, something they didn't fully understand, but couldn't look away from. For Anna, it was the beginning of something she hadn't dared to imagine. Connection. Her scars no longer felt exposed. For the first time in years, she didn't want to hide them. Because here sat someone who understood they weren't marks of shame. They were proof of battle survived, proof of resilience carved into her very skin. And though the eyes of strangers still lingered, their weight no longer crushed her. The only gaze that mattered was Tom's, steady and knowing, a mirror reflecting her own truth back at her. In that moment, Anna realized something profound. She wasn't broken. She had been carrying a story too heavy for one person, but she no longer had to carry it alone. The silence of the diner wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was a silence of respect, of realization. And for Anna, it was the first silence in years that didn't make her feel invisible. The diner seemed to hold its breath as Tom and Anna sat across from each other. The world outside the windows continued in motion, the occasional car driving past, the distant hum of traffic, but inside, time slowed. Every fork clink, every cough, every shuffle of chairs became secondary to the conversation unfolding in that corner booth. Anna shifted slightly, the heat from the coffee mug grounding her, yet she couldn't stop her eyes from flitting to Tom. He had that calm, measured air about him, the kind that comes only from someone who has seen chaos and survived. His forearm rested on the table between them, the faded insignia of their shared company visible, a silent testament to battles endured. "You were in Kandahar," he said again, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't a question. It was a statement away to acknowledge that he, too, knew what she had faced. Anna swallowed hard. Memories rose unbidden, vivid and cruel. Nights spent patrolling dusty roads, the whine of distant gunfire, the constant hum of tension in the air. Friends lost in ambushes, their names whispered in her mind long after the funerals. The sand burned into her boots, her skin, her consciousness, even after she left. I never talk about it," Anna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one really understands." Tom nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "I know. Most people don't. And some of them, they shouldn't." His hand hovered above his own scars, the lines just as jagged and haunting as hers. "We carry it, and they look at us like we're broken or worse, like we asked for it." Anna felt the lump in her throat grow heavier. For years, she had carried her memories in silence, hiding the scars beneath long sleeves, avoiding questions, avoiding anyone who might pry. She had never met someone who could look at her and understand without judgment. And now, here he was, Tom, a stranger, yet entirely familiar. He leaned slightly forward, voice lowering. "I lost people, Anna, people I swore I'd protect. And I keep thinking, if I survived, was it enough? Did I do enough?" His eyes didn't waver, but they were filled with something heavier than words' guilt, pain, the remnants of war etched into his very being. Anna's fingers brushed her own scars again, involuntarily. "I think about that too," she admitted. "Every day. Faces, names, the things we didn't save, the mistakes we made. They never leave." Tom nodded, silent for a few beats, as if weighing whether he should speak further. Then, in a low voice that carried both authority and empathy, he said, "But surviving isn't nothing. It's proof. Proof that someone else didn't die in vain, that the work we did mattered. Even if no one else sees it, we know. That counts." Her chest ached. Proof. She had spent years feeling like her scars were shameful, that her survival was meaningless to anyone but herself. Yet here he was, telling her it counted. It had mattered. The din of the diner faded almost entirely. The teenagers still watched, silent now, their previous cruelty replaced with awkward curiosity. They had no idea what they were witnessing, a reunion of experiences, a bridge built in silence and shared trauma. They didn't understand why the air seemed charged, why the room itself seemed to bow in deference. Anna finally spoke, voice steadier now, though still tinged with emotion. "I thought no one would ever understand. That no one could. That maybe I didn't deserve to be understood." Tom's eyes softened. "You do, and they never had the right to judge. Those scars? They're not shameful. They're badges of survival. Every line on your arms tells a story of courage, not failure." The words sank in slowly, like warm sunlight filtering through fog. She had never heard anyone speak of her scars in this way, never been given permission to feel pride instead of shame. She swallowed, blinking rapidly to keep tears from spilling, but her hands trembled slightly on the table. He continued, voice steady, deliberate. "We all carry something, Anna. I carry it too. Nights that I can't forget, mistakes that haunt me, the faces of the people we couldn't save. But we also carry resilience. That resilience is worth more than judgment or ridicule. The lump in her throat tightened, but she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. Maybe she wasn't invisible. Maybe she wasn't broken. Maybe survival wasn't a curse, but a testament. For the first time since she had entered the diner, Anna allowed herself to breathe fully. She set her coffee aside, resting her hands flat on the table. I kept thinking that being alive alone meant I had failed, she admitted. I thought if I survived, it was at the expense of everyone else. I didn't think I deserved this life. Tom's hand hovered above the table, inches from hers. No, you didn't fail. Surviving isn't just a matter of luck, it's proof of strength. You carried what most people could never imagine and kept going. That deserves recognition, not ridicule. Around them, the diner seemed to lean closer, as if drawn in by the gravity of their exchange. The teenagers shrank in their seats, no longer daring to mock. The older couple watched silently, the depth of understanding in the air palpable. Even the waitress paused mid-step, tears glinting in her eyes as she observed a conversation too heavy for most to comprehend. Anna's throat tightened again, but this time not from shame. From relief. From connection. From the knowledge that someone else, someone who had lived through it, could see her not as broken, not as a joke, but as a survivor. She finally asked, voice small but steady, "Did you lose people too?" Tom's gaze darkened, pain flickering across his face. "Yes," he admitted. "Too many. Brothers I swore I'd protect. Faces that still visit me at night. Moments I can't take back." His hand flexed on the table. "And yet, we're still here. That's the point. We're here to remember, to survive, to keep going." Anna nodded, feeling tears prick the corners of her eyes. She didn't need to hide anymore. He already knew, had seen, had felt it too. For the first time in years, she spoke of the nights that haunted her, the decisions that tortured her, the friends she had lost and couldn't save. Tom listened in silence, not interrupting, not judging, only acknowledging with his presence that her story was real, that her pain was valid. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours' time seemed suspended in that corner booth. Outside, the world moved. Inside, Anna and Tom shared the weight of years spent carrying invisible burdens, their stories entwined without effort. Words flowed, heavy with emotion, yet each syllable brought relief, connection, understanding. Eventually, Anna leaned back, hands still trembling. "I never thought I'd meet someone who understands, who really understands." Tom nodded slowly. "Neither did I, but here we are. That's enough for now." "That's a start." The diner remained silent, transformed from a place of ridicule to a sanctuary of shared recognition. Even the teenagers looked ashamed, realizing they had laughed at something sacred without understanding. They looked away, murmuring apologies they didn't know how to voice. Anna felt something in her chest shift, a mixture of relief, pride, and something tender she hadn't allowed herself in years. Hope. She wasn't alone. She had never truly been alone. Tom glanced at his watch, but didn't move. "Stay a moment longer," he said. "Let's remember that we're still here, that we survived. That counts for something." Anna nodded. "It does. It really does. For the first time since the desert, since the battlefield, since the long nights of isolation, she felt seen. Entirely, completely, undeniably seen. And for that, she silently thanked fate, the universe, or whatever force had guided Tom to that corner booth at that exact moment. In the din of the diner, with all eyes quietly watching, two survivors found each other, not by chance, but by the invisible threads of shared history, pain, and resilience. And for Anna, it was the beginning of a reckoning, a shift from shame to understanding, from silence to voice. She didn't know what the future would hold, or how long this fragile connection would last. But at that moment, across the table from a man who bore the same marks of survival, Anna finally felt a spark of belonging. And that spark, faint though it was, ignited something she had not felt in years, the possibility that her scars were not a burden, but a testament. The diner had fallen into a hush that felt almost sacred. The usual clatter of silverware, the hum of conversation, even the hiss of the coffee machine seemed to recede, leaving only Anna, Tom, and the unspoken gravity of their shared history. Anna stared at her coffee, now lukewarm, the surface rippling faintly from her restless fingers. She hadn't noticed how tightly she had gripped the mug until she released it, letting it sit untouched between them. "I didn't think anyone would understand," she said finally, her voice small, hesitant. "The things I carried, the nights I can't forget. I thought no one else could feel what I feel, could remember what I remember." Tom nodded slowly. "I know," he said. His eyes softened, but the intensity of his gaze never wavered. "I carried it too. Some nights, the memories feel like they've taken up residence in my chest, pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. Faces, places, sounds, smells. You don't forget it." Anna swallowed, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. She had told herself, over and over, that silence was safer, that no one could bear the weight she carried. And yet here was Tom, sitting across from her, living proof that someone had endured and survived the same hellscape she had known. Her mind drifted back to the desert, Kandahar, the dry heat baking into her skin, the dust clawing at her throat. The nights spent crouched in sand, her rifle trembling slightly in her hands as explosions shook the ground around her. Faces of comrades flashing in her memory friends she had laughed with one day, and then lost to a sniper's bullet or an IED the next. I lost people," she whispered, barely audible. "People I swore I would protect." Tom's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping for a moment. "I did too," he admitted. "I can still see them sometimes. The way they smiled. The last words they spoke. I hear them at night. I see them when I close my eyes." Anna's hands trembled slightly, resting on the table. She was surprised at how much she wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to confirm that he was real, that this wasn't some hallucination born of isolation and fear. She didn't, but the urge lingered. "We thought surviving meant forgetting," she said, voice catching. "We thought if we kept living, the pain would disappear. But it doesn't. Not really." "No," Tom said quietly, his voice firm but compassionate. "It doesn't disappear. And maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it's the reminder that we have to keep going, that we have to honor those who didn't make it, that we have to keep their stories alive." Anna nodded slowly. That's a good way to see it." Her eyes flicked to his arm again, to the tattoo that mirrored hers. It wasn't just ink. It wasn't just a mark. It was memory, grief, survival, all etched in a permanent line across their skin. Tom leaned back slightly, eyes sweeping the diner almost absently, but not missing a single glance. "You know," he said, "most people don't understand what it's like to walk back into a world that's completely oblivious. Everyone's moving on. Life goes on. But we're stuck in a kind of echo chamber of memory. It isolates you, makes you feel like the world moved on and left you behind." Anna swallowed hard. "Exactly." Her voice was almost a whisper now. I thought I had to carry it all alone. That if I showed anyone, they wouldn't understand. They'd see only scars, only pain, only brokenness." "You're not broken," Tom said firmly, leaning forward slightly. "Every scar on your body is proof that you endured, that you survived. It's a map of resilience. And if you're alive, then you're still carrying the fight in a way that matters. Her eyes pricked with tears. She had spent years hiding her body, hiding her history, hiding her pain. And now, here was a man who had lived the same hell, acknowledging that her suffering didn't make her weak. It made her human. It made her strong. It made her remarkable. For the first time in what felt like decades, Anna felt a small flicker of pride, a warmth that went beyond relief. Her chest, heavy with memory and guilt, loosened slightly. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a survivor who had been overlooked. She was a witness to history, a bearer of truth, and finally, someone understood. "I remember nights when I couldn't sleep," she said, voice low. "The dust storms, the constant tension. You hear a sound, a shift in the sand, and your heart stops. You think it's over, but it's never over." Tom nodded solemnly. "We would count each other's patrols, track who was awake, who was quiet. Every small moment of attention mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. And the nights? They haunt you. They don't go away. They stay with you, like a shadow you carry." Anna glanced around at the other diners. The teenagers were no longer smirking, their eyes downcast, embarrassed at having mocked someone who had lived such a reality. Even the older couple near the counter seemed to lean closer, captivated by the conversation without fully understanding. Her hand brushed a scar lightly, the memory of a firefight rising vividly. She had lost friends she couldn't forget, missions that had gone wrong, mistakes she carried alone. She had blamed herself for years. And yet, across from her, Tom seemed to carry similar weight without judgment, without expectation. "You kept it all inside," he said, like a silent oath. "That's something soldiers do, but it's heavy. Too heavy for one person to carry forever." Anna nodded. "Yes, that's why I thought I'd always be alone. The world doesn't notice scars like ours unless they're visible, and even then, they judge. They mock." Tom's hand hovered above the table, almost touching hers. "Not everyone," he said softly. "Not me. I see them for what they are. Not marks of shame, but proof of what you endured. You survived. That's worth more than their judgment." Tears slipped freely now, tracing paths down her cheeks. She felt the tension of years release in a rush, the dam breaking. And for the first time, she allowed herself to let someone else in. She didn't need to explain every scar, every memory, every loss. He already understood. The conversation stretched on, flowing freely now. They traded stories of patrols, firefights, the nights that never ended, and the moments of quiet courage between chaos. They laughed softly at the absurdity of certain memories, grimaced at the horrors they had endured, and nodded in solemn recognition of comrades lost. The diner remained quiet, spectators held in awe, though they didn't fully grasp the depth of what was happening. Even the clatter of dishes had stopped, as if time had slowed to give Anna and Tom the space to breathe, to remember, and to acknowledge that they were still here. Anna realized that for the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing isolation of her memories. She was not alone. Not anymore. Her scars weren't just physical. They were a bridge between her and someone who truly understood. And in that moment, across the corner booth, she felt seen, truly seen, in a way that lifted some of the weight from her shoulders. Tom looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. "We're still here," he said quietly. "And that matters." Anna nodded, the weight of the words settling in her chest. "It does." More than I realized. The teenagers shifted awkwardly in their seats, finally understanding the gravity of what they had mocked. The older couple and the waitress remained silent, witnesses to a connection too profound to interrupt. Outside, the sun dipped slightly lower, casting golden light across the floor of the diner. Inside, in a quiet corner, Two survivors shared stories that had been trapped in shadow for years. The scars on their bodies, the memories in their minds, and the lives they had lived all converged in that moment, creating a fragile, luminous space where understanding could finally exist. Anna exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave her. She wasn't alone. She had never truly been alone. And for the first time in years, hope felt possible. The diner remained still, almost reverent, as Anna and Tom shared stories that few could ever fully understand. The clatter of dishes, the murmured conversations, even the hiss of the coffee machine faded into the background, leaving only the gravity of their presence in that quiet corner. Anna's hands rested on the table, trembling slightly, though her chest felt lighter than it had in years. She had spent decades carrying the weight of her experiences alone, memories of night patrols, firefights, and comrades lost, all hidden beneath layers of silence and shame. "You ever wonder," Anna began cautiously, "if anyone else notices? Notices the scars, the struggle, the nights that never end?" Tom's gaze never wavered. "I think they see it," he said softly, "but they don't know how to respond. They don't understand the weight we carry, so they look away or they mock what they can't comprehend. That's why it's important to find someone who does understand." Anna nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in her throat. Her entire life, since returning from Kandahar, had been spent trying to hide what she carried, trying to appear normal in a world that couldn't see the chaos behind her eyes. And now, across from her, sat a man who had lived the same terror and survived it. Tom's eyes softened. "I still see them sometimes," he admitted quietly. "Faces I couldn't save. Friends I thought I protected. Their voices come back at night. I hear their laughter, their last words. And I wonder, could I have done more?" Anna's hands unconsciously brushed over her scars. "I ask myself that every day," she whispered. "The mistakes, the losses. You think you've survived, but the memories never leave. They haunt you." "They do," Tom said solemnly. "But surviving isn't nothing. Every step we take after, every day we live, it honors them. That's how we carry them forward. That's how their lives matter. Not to anyone else, but to us." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the room dissolved into silence. She had never heard anyone speak so plainly about the weight of survival, so openly about the guilt that had eaten at her for years. He understood, truly understood. "You're right," she admitted. "I've spent so long thinking surviving was a failure. That just being alive meant someone else's story ended badly. But maybe it's not failure. Maybe it's proof that we kept fighting, that we endured." Tom nodded. "Exactly. And your scars, they're not reminders of weakness. They're reminders of everything you lived through and overcame. They're medals of survival, etched in flesh." Anna's chest tightened at the words. For the first time, she considered the possibility that the things she had always hidden, her scars, her memories, her pain, could be recognized not as shameful, but as significant. That perhaps the story they told could be shared, not feared. Around them, the diner had shifted. The teenagers who had mocked her before sat quietly in their booth, their expressions tense, realizing for the first time the depth of the experiences they had trivialized. The older couple near the counter leaned forward slightly, captivated, while the waitress lingered, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. The atmosphere was no longer judgmental or frivolous. It had become something almost sacred, a witness to understanding and shared human resilience. Anna's hands trembled as she spoke again. "There were nights," she admitted, "when I thought I wouldn't make it back. Nights when I saw friends fall, and I kept moving because I had to. But I hated myself for surviving. I felt guilty, undeserving." Tom leaned forward, placing his forearm gently on the table, not touching her, but close enough to anchor the conversation. "I've been there," he said softly. "The guilt can be unbearable. You wonder why you're still here when others aren't. But we survive for them too, not just for ourselves. Our survival carries meaning, even when the world doesn't see it." Tears slipped down on his cheeks, and she wiped them quickly with the back of her hand, embarrassed yet relieved. "I never thought anyone would understand that. I thought everyone would just see the scars, the shell of me, and judge." Tom shook his head. "They do, but that's their limitation, not yours. You carry something too profound for them to grasp. And that's why you have to find someone who can. Someone who sees not just the scars, but the survival, the courage, the heart that kept you alive." Anna's chest ached as she nodded. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the isolation that had haunted her since leaving the desert. She wasn't alone in this burden. Someone shared it. Someone understood every jagged memory and silent regret. "You kept it all inside for so long," Tom said gently. "Like a sacred oath. That's what we soldiers do, but it's heavy. Too heavy for one person alone." Anna felt a sob rise in her throat. She had believed her silence was protection, her secrecy a shield against judgment. But it had also been a cage. And now, across the table, that cage felt like it had cracked open just enough for understanding to seep in. I didn't know it could be different," she admitted, voice breaking. "I didn't know I could be seen and not judged, heard and not blamed, understood and not pitied." Tom's eyes softened, and he offered her a faint smile. "It can be different. You just need someone who's walked through the fire with you, even if years apart. Someone who knows that survival isn't shame, it's valor. You've earned the right to be recognized, Anna." Her hands moved over her scars again, almost reverently this time. They were no longer just marks of pain. They were proof of her endurance, her courage, and her resilience. And now, for the first time, she felt someone else acknowledge that truth. The diner remained quiet, filled with a palpable sense of respect. Even the teenagers, who had once mocked her, sat in stunned silence. The older couple leaned forward slightly, witnessing a rare moment of raw human connection. And the waitress, still at the counter, kept her coffee pot poised but motionless, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. Anna spoke again, her voice steadier now. "I thought I'd never find anyone who understands. I thought I'd carry this alone forever." "You don't have to," Tom said softly. "Not anymore. Not ever again. We carry it together now, and that makes all the difference." Her chest tightened, not from guilt or shame, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of being seen. Truly seen. The burden she had carried alone for years was shared, acknowledged, and understood. For the first time in years, Anna let herself exhale fully, feeling the weight of isolation lift just slightly. Her scars, once symbols of hidden trauma, now felt like bridges connecting her to someone who had endured the same storms and emerged alive. She realized then that survival was not solitary. It was shared. And in that shared understanding, there was healing. Tom looked at her with quiet authority and compassion. "We're still here," he said. "And that counts for something. That counts for more than you'll ever know." Anna nodded, tears still glinting in her eyes. "It does," she whispered. "It really does." Outside, the sunlight had shifted, casting long golden streaks across the floor. Inside, in a quiet corner of a small-town diner, two survivors shared stories that had been trapped in shadow for years. The scars on their bodies, the memories in their minds, and the lives they had lived all converged in that moment, creating a fragile sanctuary of understanding, acknowledgement, and hope. For Anna, it was the first step toward reclaiming her voice, her presence, and her dignity. She was not alone. She had never truly been alone. And in that realization, a spark of healing ignited, fragile but undeniable, hinting at the possibility that the weight of survival could finally be shared, not endured in silence. The din of the diner had faded into a kind of reverent silence. Even the faint hiss of the coffee machine seemed subdued, as though the space itself recognized the weight of the moment. Anna and Tom sat across from each other in the corner booth, their shared gaze heavy with history, understanding, and the slow unraveling of long-held pain. Anna's hands rested atop the table, trembling slightly as she traced the edge of her coffee mug, her mind replaying the events of the day. The laughter, the judgment, the isolation, it all felt like another world now. She remembered stepping into the diner, bracing herself for ridicule, and yet here she was, met not with mockery, but recognition. Tom's presence across from her grounded her, a silent anchor amidst the storm of memories. He hadn't just understood the battles she'd fought in Kandahar. He had shared them. The echoes of gunfire, the desert heat, the nights that never ended, they were no longer hers alone. They belonged to both of them now, a shared tapestry of survival, grief, and resilience. "I've spent years thinking," Anna said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, "that people would only see my scars and judge. That anyone who looked at me would only see the broken parts, the failures." Tom shook his head slowly. "They do," he admitted. "But that's their limitation, not yours. Your scars. They're not failures. They're evidence. Evidence that you lived, that you endured, that you fought. Not everyone can survive what we survived." Anna's gaze fell to her forearms, where the pale lines of her scars met the edge of the faded unit tattoo. Memories of firefights and lost comrades surged like waves against the shore of her mind. She had always thought the marks were shameful, reminders of pain, of survival that came at too great a cost. And yet Tom's words cut through the shame like sunlight through clouds. "They're not just scars," he continued softly. "They're proof. Proof that you lived when so many others didn't. That you fought when giving up was the easier option. That's bravery." Her chest tightened. Tears threatened, but she blinked rapidly, holding them back. She had spent years burying her grief, her memories, her sense of unworthiness. And here was someone validating it, giving her permission to feel the significance of her endurance. The diner had grown quiet around them. The teenagers who had once laughed at her now sat frozen, guilt and curiosity written across their faces. The older couple leaned forward slightly, silently observing the rare scene unfolding in their small-town diner. Even the waitress lingered near the counter, her hand poised over a coffee pot she no longer carried, watching with wide, empathetic eyes. Anna swallowed hard. "I thought surviving meant failing everyone I left behind," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I thought being alive when others weren't. Made me selfish. Made me less." Tom's gaze held hers, unwavering. "No," he said firmly. "Surviving doesn't make you less. It makes you the carrier of their memory, the witness to what was lost. You didn't fail them. You survived because someone had to. That matters." For a moment, words failed Anna entirely. She could only stare at him, at the evidence of shared history, the tattoos, the scars, the pain mirrored in his eyes. She felt the weight of the years she had carried alone begin to lift, the isolation dissolving in the recognition that she wasn't broken, she wasn't invisible, she wasn't alone. Tom leaned back slightly, his arm still resting on the table, the sunlight catching the faded lines of his own scars. "There's a strange kind of peace that comes from understanding," he said quietly. "Not forgetting, not pretending the pain isn't there, but acknowledging it. You carry it, and it doesn't have to be alone anymore." Anna nodded slowly, her fingers brushing lightly over the raised lines on her forearm. Each scar was a story, a moment of endurance, a silent testament to battles survived. And now, For the first time in years, she could see them not as marks of shame, but as symbols of resilience. "I never thought anyone would see me like this," she admitted. "Not just my scars, but me. All of me." Tom's eyes softened. "It takes someone who's been through it to really see. That's why it's so rare. But now you've found it. And now it matters." Outside, the late afternoon sunlight shifted, painting the diner in warm, golden hues. The ordinary sounds of the world cars passing, distant voices, the occasional clatter of utensils faded into background noise. Inside, the corner booth became a sanctuary, a sacred space where two survivors could share their truths without fear, judgment, or ridicule. The teenagers who had mocked Anna now whispered among themselves, embarrassment and realization etched on their faces. For the first time, they seemed to understand that the woman they had laughed at carried burdens beyond their comprehension. They shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Anna and Tom, recognizing the gravity of the moment, and silently retreating into respect. Anna exhaled slowly, the tension of years melting slightly from her shoulders. "I don't feel invisible," she murmured. "Not anymore. You never were," Tom replied. "You were just carrying too much alone. That's why it's hard to see. But now, you're seen. And that changes everything." The words resonated in Anna's chest, like a song she hadn't heard in years. To be seen, to be understood. To have someone acknowledge not only the scars on her skin, but the memories, the survival, the courage etched into every line. It was overwhelming, and yet healing. They spoke quietly for hours or maybe minutes. Time had become fluid, trading memories, recounting lost comrades, sharing stories that had haunted them for years. Laughter, soft and tentative at first, began to creep into their conversation as they remembered small, absurd moments amidst the chaos of war. Even in the midst of trauma, there had been moments of levity, moments of humanity, moments they had survived. Anna found herself smiling, the tightness in her chest loosening further. She hadn't laughed like this in years, not fully, not without guilt or fear shadowing it. Tom's presence made it possible. His understanding created a space where she could breathe, where she could simply exist without judgment. The diner, once a place of ridicule, had transformed into a witness to resilience. The staff, the patrons, the teenagers, they all watched, some with awe, some with quiet respect. None spoke. None dared interrupt the fragile balance of understanding and healing that had taken root. "I never thought I'd meet someone who really understands," Anna whispered. "Someone who could see all of this, not just the scars, but everything behind them." Tom's lips curved into a faint smile. "Neither did I, but here we are. And it matters. That recognition, that understanding, it changes everything." Anna felt tears prick at her eyes once more, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release, relief, and the first fragile taste of hope in years. The burden she had carried alone for so long, the isolation, the fear, the judgment, was finally shared. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that survival could be more than mere endurance. It could be connection. It could be recognition. It could be healing. Tom leaned back, watching her with steady eyes. "We've survived," he said simply. "And surviving isn't nothing. It's everything." Anna nodded slowly, letting the words settle in her chest. She had survived. She had endured. And now, in the presence of someone who understood, she could begin to see herself not as broken, not as judged, but as whole. The sun dipped lower outside, casting long golden streaks across the diner floor. Inside, in a quiet corner booth, two survivors shared a truth that few could understand, that scars were not shame, survival was not guilt, and recognition, true recognition, could heal wounds that had festered in silence for too long. Anna exhaled, her chest lighter than it had been in years. She was seen. She was understood. And for the first time, the weight of her years of isolation began to lift, replaced by something faint, fragile, and undeniable: hope. The diner had grown quiet in a way that felt almost reverent, like the world outside had paused to honor something sacred. The sunlight poured through the windows, painting long golden streaks across the worn linoleum floor. But the warmth of the light was secondary to the warmth that had begun to fill the room, the warmth of understanding, recognition, and unspoken respect. Anna sat across from Tom, tracing the faded lines of her unit tattoo one last time before pulling her sleeve slightly down, though the scars underneath no longer carried the weight of shame. She had spent years hiding them, hiding herself, hiding the truth of her survival from a world that didn't seem to care. But now, she realized, hiding had never protected her, it had only isolated her. Tom's steady gaze met hers across the table. "You've carried so much alone for so long," he said softly, his voice carrying both compassion and quiet authority. "But you don't have to anymore. Not now. Not ever again." Her chest tightened, but it wasn't the familiar ache of guilt or fear. It was relief, the kind that comes when you finally allow someone to see all of you and still accept you. She nodded slowly. I think I understand that now. And I think I can finally let some of it go." Around them, the diner's atmosphere had transformed completely. The teenagers who had mocked her earlier now sat silently, their earlier arrogance replaced with humility. Some of them whispered to each other, as if trying to make sense of the woman they had belittled, now sitting with a veteran whose presence commanded quiet respect. The older couple by the counter had leaned in slightly, captivated by the story unfolding before them, though they didn't fully understand the magnitude of what had happened. The waitress, her coffee pot resting untouched at her side, observed quietly, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. Anna realized in that moment that what she had feared most, judgment, ridicule, isolation, was no longer present. What remained was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, she discovered, had the power to heal in ways she hadn't imagined. She glanced at Tom, and something she hadn't felt in years washed over her. The fragile stirrings of hope. "I never thought I'd find someone who understands," she whispered. "Someone who can see everything, the scars, the memories, the guilt, and not think I'm broken." Tom's lips curved into a faint, almost wry smile. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But here we are, and that changes everything." The conversation shifted naturally, flowing from past experiences to reflections on survival, resilience, and the unexpected moments of humanity amidst chaos. They laughed softly over memories that had been absurd or strangely comforting during the harshest nights of deployment, and they winced together at the sharp edges of memory, the losses, the impossible choices, the haunting silences of fallen friends. Anna felt herself opening in a way she hadn't allowed in years. She told Tom about nights she had spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if she deserved to be alive when so many hadn't. She spoke of guilt that had gnawed at her, memories she couldn't erase, and the loneliness of carrying all of it in silence. Tom listened with unwavering attention, never interrupting, never judging. He shared his own stories, his own scars, his own nights haunted by loss. And in that exchange, Anna discovered the unspoken truth she had longed to hear. She wasn't alone. Her burden, as heavy as it was, could be shared. The teenagers, now silent, shifted uncomfortably, seemingly aware that they had witnessed something far beyond their understanding. A rare and profound connection between survivors, one that demanded respect. Even those who had mocked her hours before could not ignore the dignity she now carried, quiet but undeniable. Anna exhaled slowly, letting the weight of years lift slightly from her shoulders. She realized, with a mix of awe and relief, that she no longer feared being seen. She had been visible all along, just not to those who mattered. And now, finally, she was seen by someone who truly understood. Tom reached across the table, resting his forearm near hers, not touching, but close enough to anchor her presence. "You survived," he said quietly. "And that's more than anyone can take away from you. That's your story, and it matters." Tears filled Anna's eyes, not of shame, but of release. She had spent years carrying the invisible weight of survival alone, thinking that no one could understand, that the world would never recognize her struggle. But here, across from Tom, she understood something profound. Survival could be honored, not feared. Scars could be acknowledged, not judged. And understanding could heal wounds left raw for years. The diner, a place that had once been the stage for mockery, had become a sanctuary of respect. Patrons moved quietly, some nodding subtly, others whispering to one another, all witnesses to a transformation unfolding in real time. Even the waitress, who had observed silently from behind the counter, offered a soft, understanding smile, her gesture small but significant. Anna's gaze returned to her forearm, the pale scars beneath her tattoo catching the light. She traced the lines gently, each one a testament to survival, courage, and endurance. For the first time, she felt a sense of ownership over her story, rather than shame. She had carried the burden long enough. Now it belonged to her, not to fear, not to judgment, but to truth. Tom watched her with steady eyes, recognizing the shift. "It's a beginning," he said. "Not the end, but a beginning. You survived. You're here. And now you can carry it differently. With someone who understands. With someone who sees." Anna nodded, a faint smile breaking across her face. "Yes," she whispered. A beginning. Outside, the late afternoon sun continued to pour through the windows, bathing the diner in a warm, golden glow. Inside, the ordinary clatter of utensils and quiet murmurs of conversation returned slowly, gently, as if life itself had resumed, but in a transformed way. The energy of ridicule, of judgment, had been replaced by respect, understanding, and quiet reverence. The teenagers who had mocked her shifted, unsure how to respond, their bravado gone. The older couple returned to their conversation, quieter now, softened by what they had witnessed. The waitress moved to refill coffee cups with careful attention, a subtle acknowledgement of the dignity that had been restored in the corner booth. Anna felt the weight of years lift further, the isolation of her memories replaced by something stronger, something resilient. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living fully and with acknowledgement. Tom leaned back, his presence steady and calm. "We're survivors," he said softly, almost to himself. "And survivors deserve to be seen, deserve to be remembered, deserve to carry their stories without shame." Anna's gaze met his, and in that quiet exchange, she understood something she had not allowed herself to feel in over a decade. She was worthy. Her scars were worthy. Her story was worthy. And she had finally found someone who could see it all and honor it. The final moments in the diner stretched, serene and transformative. Anna allowed herself to breathe fully, to embrace the relief, the recognition, the quiet pride of survival. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't alone. And the laughter, the ridicule of the past hours, had been replaced by understanding that was deeper, more profound, and enduring. As the sun dipped lower outside, painting the world in shades of amber and gold, Anna and Tom sat together in quiet solidarity. Their scars, their tattoos, their memories, they were no longer burdens carried in isolation. They were a bridge, connecting two survivors who had endured horrors few could imagine and emerged, not just alive, but whole. Anna finally allowed herself a smile, small but real. tinged with tears, yet luminous with relief. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "For seeing me. For understanding." Tom nodded, a faint smile lifting his lips. "No, thank you," he replied. "For surviving. For carrying it. For being here, and in that small-town diner, amidst the ordinary clatter of cups and murmurs. Two veterans sat together, bound not just by shared experiences, but by recognition, understanding, and the quiet triumph of survival. The room itself seemed to exhale, releasing the weight of judgment and embracing the dignity of what had unfolded. Anna looked around the diner, her gaze soft but clear. She saw the change in the room, the acknowledgement in the eyes of those who had witnessed her pain and her courage. She realized, with a sense of awe, that her journey was no longer solitary. She had survived, yes, but now she had also been seen. And in that recognition, she found something she had long thought impossible: peace.